Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Seco, and today I am joined by senior concept designer Rachel Roubicek. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Today we're going to be talking about the illustrations in the Court of the Dead, Rise of the Reaper General novel, and you have put a lot of beautiful work in here. I want to explore it, but before we dive into this, how long have you been working in Court of the Dead? Could Court of the Dead fans recognize your work anywhere else?
Well, actually, a few days ago was actually my 6th anniversary at Sideshow, so that's pretty cool. But I started Court of the Dead probably maybe 6 months into working at Sideshow, so I've been with it for a while. And I've worked on miscellaneous projects, mostly statues, some behind-the-scenes stuff with some of the games, and obviously this. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Okay, very cool. Are there any particular pieces that you could point out that you've worked on?
My favorite personally is Malavestros. He was the first piece that was pretty, like, a lot of my input was with that piece. I worked on the second editions of Galavarb, Gethsemane, and Kier. I worked on Ravelach, Elianastis, a few of the smaller products like our cartoons and our candles and miscellaneous little tiny things like that. The Pure Arts figures, I forgot about those too, but yeah, okay, I worked on those.
So there's lots to choose from. If you're a Court of the Dead fan, it's safe to say you're a fan of Rachel's art, and it's in this book too. So I want to sort of open it up, and while we're trying to find a page, can I ask you about the process designing one of the illustrations in here?
When Tom was first coming to me with this, the book had gone through various editions and states, and so he essentially gave me run-throughs of what scenes he kind of wanted and specific story moments he was trying to capture. The way it would start was like a bunch of rougher rounds, like trying just to get like what the composition might look like, which characters we want in it, do we want a lot of characters, do we want little characters, and then also trying to match it to a certain style aesthetic that I was trying to go for, which was this like neat pen and ink style.
Yeah, this style must be a different approach than designing something for a statue. How did you approach this fantastic style in here?
Thank you. So the way it started off was I had gone to a convention and there was this bookstore that had this book by the artist named Sergio Topi, and I believe he's Italian, but he has this beautiful pen and ink style. And I remember coming back from the convention and talking to Tom, and I was like, oh yeah, I got this really awesome, cool book that has like this awesome pen and ink style. And he's like, oh, you mean this book? And him and I just kind of talked about it, and I was mentioning to him that, hey, I think for the illustrations, I'd really like to do a sort of pen and ink style. One as something that I'm not as strongly used to, but I'd like to try out just because I think it could work really well for the aesthetic of Court of the Dead and kind of having that like nice little intricate details like most of our product, and I thought the ink style would capture that really well. From there, I had to do various passes of like trying out the ink, but in Photoshop. So I had to like make my own brushes that felt like they were ink, wow, but still using Photoshop, which totally not using actual like traditional work. So I had to really make it convincing. And then from there, it was really just going in and taking the concepts and taking them through stages. So it was a really rough stage of trying to get like the basic shape. Like, okay, there's these two characters, one's here, one's here. Are they both taking up half of the page, or are they taking up like rule of thirds, kind of a bunch of these artistic terms for composition. From there, I would go into more details like Tom wanting like various things for like Melthis is her shield and her axe, and Gignoth kind of having sort of his spear and like what he looked like. These two actually were created exclusively for this book. They had not been designed before or had created, so I had to personally create them as well. And that was a stage where I had to do like actual character design for them before I did the illustrations. So backtracking to that. But these were two examples of characters that needed to be designed, but there's some characters in the book that if the readers go through, they are familiar with, but have a little bit of a difference to their design aesthetic. One note is like Xyle looking younger than she is by having her, instead of her plates kind of in that crowned adorned style, she has sort of a disc like halo shape.
Oh, wow.
And trying to make it where it's still her, but back when the Underworld was in its developing stages, well, during this period. There we are.
Yeah, so you were talking about sort of how they were redesigned, and I can see Xyle here has a totally different look than what we're used to. How did you approach these redesigns within the context, and how did you decide who to put in these pictures? Was that collaborative with Tom, just reading through?
So Kier has kind of not come into her position yet in Spirit. So Elianastis kind of was still fairly active in Spirit at this point. So you can see her. Gethsemane, a younger version of her, letting her hair down actually. Still has her crown, but in a little bit more relaxed state. And with Xyle and Sinvath, it was cool to see the twins and seeing them and actually portraying them, because there's only been a limited amount of time seeing Sinvath, so having him next to his sister would be ideal. But the way I approached this was going to Tom and asking, hey, if we're doing this book and it's in the past, do we want to do past designs of these characters, or at least, past for the Underworld, because what is time in the Underworld, really? Younger versions of them, at least. And I did kind of some studies of taking Xyle's typical portrait and then kind of doing different shape of her head designs. So I would explore, I tried some ones that were more downward, a little bit more upward, but then I kind of decided, you know what, let's keep that top plate she has, which is that one that's in the statue and in the art people have seen of her. But then I decided, what if I took off that back stuff and added the halo that kind of is a cohesive design, not only to the Underworld, but also to Heaven and Hell, and that we're from the same world and aesthetic, and I wanted to match that. So that was kind of how I went in that exploration path.
So could you tell us a little bit more about your approach for fashion and everything? Because in Court of the Dead, it's just so lavish and beautiful and decorative. Could you talk to us about the fashion here?
So with Gethsemane, the queen likes to wear variations of extravagant gowns. And so for this one, I remember Tom mentioning that he wanted a Grecian aesthetic to her. It's shown off a little bit with more like the single sleeved side and the more exposed skin. And so I remember that being something that he wanted for her. And with Xyle and Sinvath, I remember Tom mentioning he wanted to kind of take inspiration from the hats that the cardinals and stuff like that wear, just because of how they believe bone is like. Its structure is very similar to a lot of organizations in our own world. So I remember Tom mentioning that he kind of wanted that a little bit into Bone's design language. So they kind of have very much ceremonial sort of garb like that. And then with Elianastis, for the little that you see, I remember that Tom mostly wanted her to have just a nice, elegant, mostly not really a period of clothing, but more just spiritual sort of rags that are sort of floating and wafting off of her, like her hair.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really with these ones. Difficult because a lot of the clothing in this was mostly shoulder busts up, not many full body shots.
And designing a lot of armor, I imagine, too, and going from something that's wafty and spirity to, the hard metal design has got to be really interesting. Did you have a favorite drawing or part of the process when doing all of this? Because I'm amazed with all the fashion. I'm amazed with the cross-hatching that you talked about. I'm amazed with all of it. Did you have a favorite part?
I would say probably the very beginning stages of trying to figure out the brush was pretty fun. But I think really what was really nice is that once I had started doing laying it in and doing the line work, it was really nice to start seeing that the more and more layers I did, it started coming more to life with the values and shading. And I thought that was really cool. It was actually exciting to be oh, cool, it actually looks like something right now, rather than, oh, this sketch is somehow going to look good at the end, at least I hope. So that was really cool. I also really liked doing these. It's something that actually I got really inspired by Topi, the Sergio Topi guy I was mentioning, that he has these moments of where he does very high contrast with the black ink versus the white negative shape, which if you're not an artist, negative shape is essentially the areas like the in-between spaces here of the chains and the body, or the environment piece around, just taking the white and using that to help make the composition of the piece. And then positive shapes are the actual those little black rectangles I have and things like that. So I really enjoyed having the contrast variation with that. So this neat area here, if there's a little bit of black there against the sharp black, solid blacks versus the white of the background. I really enjoyed doing moments like that.
I've noticed that there are quite a few of these design decisions throughout the illustrations, these black bars. Is there some special significance to that, or
no? That was just something that I thought was a nice graphic look to it, that I thought would have a lot of dark contrast against predominantly all of them having white backgrounds. So I wanted to have that. So there's no significance. It just was that I thought it was a neat design choice that I wanted to do.
It absolutely is. And nearly every single picture in this book that I've seen blows my mind in a completely new way.
Thank you.
And it's just been incredible to be able to look through and experience the book, not just with the words, but also with the pictures alongside it. Rachel, thank you so much for talking to us about Rise of the Reaper General. It's been wonderful having you here.
All right, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking about it.
Yeah, and thank you for all the work you've done over the years for Court of the Dead, illustrating and bringing it to life in the way that you have. It's been incredible to see, and thank you for what's in this book.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
If you guys are interested in seeing the illustrations in this book, if you want to see this book, go ahead and follow that link down below, and thank you all for watching. As always, don't forget to rise, conquer, and rule.